Okay, I'm continuing my series of going from every year since I first started paying attention to the movies and selecting a movie of the year, and sometimes selecting more than one movie, or sometimes I select a movie of the year and a runner-up uh, um, movie of the year. And again, my thing here is I'm not necessarily talking about I haven't gone out of my way to watch everything that's been made. Nothing like that. I mean, I am to a degree a cinephile, but not nothing like that. I wouldn't have any interest in casting the net that wide. But I talk about movies that really I felt uh, were were high quality and which did something for me, uh, to the extent that even that looking back now, I would have to say, yeah, that was the movie of the year for me that year. And again, when I was a younger man, I flirted with the idea of going into the industry. I'm not sorry that I didn't, but nevertheless, I have always I've always been an inveterate cinephile. So we ended last time with 1991. We're picking up with 92. And my movie of the year for 1992 is Reservoir Dogs. This is the debut of Quentin Tarantino. First time he, his first effort. And when I saw it in 1992, uh, I was fairly captivated by the mix of of action and dialogue. The dialogue is great. You know, the premise being there's a bunch of guys who are training to perform a bank robbery together, and they're not supposed to know each other's names, so they can't identify each other in case one of them gets arrested. So they just know each other by a color: Mr. Black, Mr. Pink, uh, Mr. Red, Mr. White, and on and on. And when I watched this movie recently, fairly recently, like within the last year, I think, I was so overjoyed to hear the dialogue, the opening bit of dialogue, because first of all, it's one of the things about this movie is, you know, these guys are all scumbags. These are criminals, you know. Um, but they're also relatable to one degree or other, and so they have these kinds of conversations about pop culture, you know. And this was, I think, the first uh, the first movie that I can think of where you had characters talking about contemporary popular culture. You know, there were like there are the movies made more for the boomers, like Stand by Me, where the boys in that movie, you know, talk about Annette Funicello's breasts and stuff like that. That, you know, the boomers watching that movie in the mid '80s would say, "Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember watching the Mickey Mouse Club and thinking about Annette's breasts." But this was the first movie where, you know, directed by a Gen X guy and with a very Gen X sensibility, and where all the pop culture references are contemporary, or most of them are. So there's this conversation about Madonna's song "Like a Virgin" and what it really means, and there is such a freedom to the dialogue. Like this, you know, they'll say anything, these guys, and they do. And that means that includes some unimaginable things. So that includes things that you would never hear in a movie today, unless maybe it was made by Quentin Tarantino. Maybe he would dare to go there again. But uh, the summary that one of the guys has when this group of criminals is talking about Madonna's song "Like a Virgin" and what it's actually about to mean, to say "like a virgin," touched for the very first time. What that is supposed to mean. It's of course very raunchy, um, but there's something about that scene, something about those first 10 minutes of the movie that just really I was caught up in a way, and I felt, yeah, like that was a hell of a time. Not to sound like an old fogey, but that was a hell of a time when you could still say stuff that that was kind of that would be considered unacceptable today. Before wokeness, political correctness, and so forth really made such inroads. Reservoir Dogs is interesting for a number of reasons. As I said, it's non-linear. It's you meet different characters in different times. Uh, the the cast is a bunch of criminals, but there are some who have, there's such a thing as honor among thieves, and there's some of the guys have more principles than others, and some of them are, it's like you eventually see that they're all on this continuum, where from not a good guy but still has a lot of good qualities, to on the other side, uh, you know psychopath, sadist, and the character played by, what's his name, Madsen. I can't remember his first name now. He died just recently, I believe. But there's a scene in which this one character tortures a cop that they've taken hostage. And I remember watching the movie at the time, and it was just a really harrowing scene, really difficult scene to sit through, very upsetting. Even though it ends, it doesn't. He isn't able. If he were left, if this sadistic freak were left to his own devices, he would torture this man until he was dead. Um, but he's stopped from doing so by one of the other criminals who happens to also be, we find out, an undercover cop. So, there's a lot, just sort of a moral ambiguity about the loyalty of, being loyal to one's fellow thieves. And of course, the robbery goes all wrong, and there's a lot of shooting, and there's a lot of bloodshed, and eventually they all turn on each other. And it's just a very well made, well constructed movie. Like most Tarantino movies, there's a combination of high culture and low culture. It's a very sophisticated movie, and this is somebody who knows cinema backwards and forwards. He knows trash cinema, and loves it, but he also loves the masters, and some more avant-garde type stuff. He's well versed in French New Wave and so forth. So Reservoir Dogs, I think, was the movie of 1992. Now, another movie that I'm that I'm going to list from 1992 as a runner-up is something that is in a lot of ways very similar, and that is Glengarry Glen Ross. Of course, I think it was initially a play written by the famous American playwright David Mamet, and again, similar to Reservoir Dogs, it's a a cast that's stacked with men. It's an all-male cast, and even though this time they're not violent bank robbers. They are um, somewhat unscrupulous salesmen, and again, some are more unscrupulous than others. But the dialogue itself, just like dialogue played such a huge role in Reservoir Dogs, in a similar way it does in Glengarry Glen Ross. And we have a similar falling out, or similar. Uh, it winds up going in a somewhat tragic direction when one character kind of gets cornered and ends up unknowingly revealing himself, revealing the thing that he has done, and it's powerful. It's entertaining. It's you probably know about it because of all the Alec Baldwin stuff. The put that coffee down. Uh, First prize is this. Second prize is this. Third prize is you're fired. Oh, did that get your attention? Um, and how he comes in and berates them. Very, very similar vibe in a lot of ways. It's interesting, these two very, very hyper macho, male cast, all male cast, and these guys are sometimes they get along and they're joking around in this tough guy sort of way, and sometimes they're at each other's throats. But they're both make for a riveting watch. Although they're both very talk heavy. Now, Reservoir Dogs also has some violence and some gore, but Glengarry Glen Ross is basically just a bunch of yapping. So if you don't like that, then you probably won't like either of these movies. But those are my movies for 1992. All right, moving on to 1993. Here's what I chose for as the movie of 1993. I chose the movie Falling Down. Now this is a movie that's kind of an anomaly for the director Joel Schumacher, who is other than Falling Down, he basically did a lot of schlock and a lot of I don't know, just standard Hollywood workman-like kind of stuff. Yeah, what else did he direct? Like one of the latter Batman movies, I think Batman and Robin. And he did A Time to Kill, which is awful. I hate it. I hate it even more in retrospect than I did at the time. But this movie, Falling Down, this is, like I said, an anomalous thing for Schumacher. I don't know who wrote it off the top of my head. Could find out very easily. But what makes this movie is Michael Douglas. Now, talk about a performance, and an anomalous performance at that. I think that by this time, Michael Douglas, I was 22 in 1983. And the movies I'd seen Michael Douglas in, I'd always sort of thought that he seemed sleazy and gross. And I mean, at the time he was still fairly young and quite handsome, but there was this sliminess about him. So like when he played a character like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, it was very believable. But when he played a hero, like in Romancing the Stone, like this sort of Indiana Jones type of heroic sort of character, I never found him very, very believable as a hero. So I say all that, but for Falling Down, this guy just shed everything. He shed all of the Michael Douglas isms, that everything that you would know him for. Uh, it's all gone here. Here he's just this completely sweet, but befuddled, and increasingly alienated man. But he's somebody who's at odds with the world. Who's will we realize more and more as the movie goes on, just how he's gotten to the point where he just can't take it anymore, and he's not gonna tolerate any crap from anybody. And this was a controversial movie even back then, even in 1993, when much more was still allowed. I mean, but a lot of people, a lot of the politically correct people saw this movie as like, oh, it's justifying white male vigilantism, and this is terrible, and blah blah blah. There's a lot of gnashing of teeth over it. But in actuality, the character played by Michael Douglas defends as we come to know him, because he, what we learn is he worked for a company that was providing weapons for the Department of Defense, but he eventually got canned by the company because they were downsizing, and now he's just he feels like a shell of his former self. His wife wants to divorce him, and it begins with him in the midst of a traffic jam in a scene that is a takeoff on a Fellini film that I haven't seen, but that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting reference there. Definitely a highfalutin reference for a hack like Schumacher. And then he just says, "No, that's it. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm going home." And he leaves his car. This is a depiction of Los Angeles, which when I visited L.A. much, much later in 2019, where all of the social ills, I think, were much, much worse than they were when this movie was made there. I had a couple days where I was riding a bus and riding the metro train a little bit of the way to get to where I was going. And there were times when I kind of felt like the fall, I felt like I was in my falling down arc. I felt like defense, because you do see just a lot of scum. Can't put it too much more plainly than that. And there's scum everywhere, but L.A. scum is a unique brand of scum. So you have this white guy in a suit, in a kind of a dorky short sleeve shirt with a tie. That whole look looks completely innocuous, and he gets bullied and picked on, but then by a bunch of people, but then strikes back and is making his way across the city, making his way back to his family, and then Robert Duvall's character, playing a policeman who's supposedly retiring, but who has certain things in common with Defense, except Duvall's character more, as we see, more has it together, still has access to his moral core in a way that Douglas's character does not. So, and then it all leads to a fairly devastating ending that I still remember. I'm not going to give it away, even though this is a movie from a long time ago. But if you haven't seen it, I really very much suggest watching it. I think you won't be disappointed. Involving a water pistol, involving the brandishing of a water pistol, a brandishing of a weapon that turns out to be just a water pistol. I would have got you. Yeah, so that was Falling Down. Definitely the movie of 1993. Um, big sensation of a film. Made a big splash, caused a lot of controversy. I saw it several times. I remember really liking it. So moving on to 1994. For 94, I have two movies that I think were the best of the year. The first one that I'm going to talk about is a movie called Barcelona, and it's the second of the trilogy directed by Whit Stillman. I discussed Whit Stillman's movie Metropolitan as my favorite, or one of my favorite movies of 1990, and you have more of the same here. It's similarly directed. I think there's a little bit of a higher budget this time, and this time there's some recognizable actors, but he also uses a couple of the guys that were in Metropolitan. Metropolitan was just mostly, I think it was all a bunch of no-name actors. And again, this portrayal, this uniquely Whit Stillman portrayal of this particular type of person, the UHB, or the urban out bourgeoisie, these hyper literate young men who are talked about as the part of the preppy class, and who like to dress up, and they have wide-ranging conversations on about a bunch of things. Again, very dialogue heavy, but the dialogue is, as I said before, I think when I was talking about Metropolitan, it's not of the naturalistic type like you'd see in Reservoir Dogs. These are the type of people who talk in complete sentences and who have a way with words, and so you remember words and phrases that are used. You remember things that they say, and the way that these lines are delivered. Again, it's like they're living in a world where it's sort of a contrived feeling world. I would say sort of similar to if you ever watch a Woody Allen movie, the way that the dialogue sounds there. It's all, it's much. There's a contrivance definitely to it, where it sounds like a stage play. Again, there was Glengarry Glen Ross, which also was like a stage play, but that had dialogue that seemed more that was a little more guttural. And this is elevated dialogue. It's highly amusing. It's very droll and so forth. But this time it's all again about young men sort of trying to find their way in life. And in this case, there's a lot of it brings up a lot of political stuff, because these two young Americans who are for a time living in Spain, in Barcelona, Spain, and I think it's in the last days of the Cold War. So it's set in the 80s before the Cold War ended. There's a lot of these two sort of conservative-leaning young American guys run into some get some turbulence from some of the young native Spaniards who are left-leaning. I don't know if there's really that much as far as plot goes. I mean, there are things that happen, but it's like Metropolitan, and like The Last Days of Disco, which came out in 1997, all Whit Stillman movies. What really brings it all together, I think, is more character based than plot based. So that's Barcelona. The other movie of 1994, I think I'd be remiss not to mention it, is Pulp Fiction. Now, this is me mentioning me talking about Tarantino again. I know, but this movie had a lot. I mean, has a lot going on. Again, we have a lot of uh, the same has a lot of the same qualities that made Reservoir Dogs interesting. You have these two hitmen. Vincent Vega and uh, Jules. Uh, what's his last name? I can't remember. Jules. Anyway, Jules and Vincent. They're just John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. Um, and Again, they're these hardened criminals. They're these remorseless killers, but they also have this relate. And Travolta's like a drug addict. We see him shooting heroin into his arm in one really disturbing scene. But there's also a relatability to these guys. It's like they're just kind of working their job. They're just average working stiffs, and they have this rapport with one another that's very entertaining. And of course, there are other storylines that interweave. And once again, you have non-linear filmmaking where one portion of the movie happens, and then we find that another, and then it moves on to a different storyline, and we find the other storyline really happened earlier in time than the first thing we saw. It's a big puzzle. You have to put it all together in the end to figure it all out. Lots of things I could say about this movie. Again, if you don't like violence, then this is probably not a movie for you. If you don't like problematic language, then this is definitely not the movie for you, because there's a lot of problematic language in this movie. But what I think is probably the most interesting thing about Pulp Fiction is the fact that it ends with a discussion of the miraculous, and an actual a possible miracle takes place in the movie, and this miracle has an effect on one of the characters. It makes one of the characters realize that he wants to leave the criminal life and walk the earth, as he says, like kung fu. Again, a lot of pop culture references here, but I think this is, I would say this is certainly a more ambitious movie than Reservoir Dogs, which is a heist caper gone bad, and it's very intricate in the way it's put together. But Pulp Fiction is several different stories involving various characters, and a lot of outrageous situations and scenarios take place. But it winds up again with this discussion of miracles, and we see one character who goes from being a remorseless murderer and criminal, who becomes, we see him let it all go and leave it all behind. And it's quite a. I remember when I saw it, I thought, wow, I didn't think we'd be seeing this. I didn't think that the theme of miracles and spiritual conversion would be on the docket here. I wasn't expecting that at all, but it goes there, and it doesn't feel out of place, and even in regard to all the other stuff that happens around it, which definitely, from the ridiculous to the sublime. There's worse than ridiculous, though. There are scenes that are, again, rather, where the violence is rather upsetting. Nothing quite like the scene that I was talking about from Reservoir Dogs, but I mean, there's some pretty disturbing violence in this movie as well. And speaking of disturbing violence, we're gonna wind things up in 1995 with with David Fincher's debut movie, uh, and that's Seven. Uh, and I like movies that push that push the boundary a little bit. There's some movies that go way beyond pushing the boundary. I have this kind of uh, unusual relationship with disturbing material, and I think I used to be much more used to be much more interesting to me to cultivate movies that are disturbing. And as I've gotten older, it's like I see a certain thing a movie's going to be about, and I think to myself, no, I don't think I'm going to watch that. I don't think I'm up to seeing that, like Irreversible or Cannibal Holocaust or Serbian Film or what have you. I'm even sorry that I saw. I'm sorry that I saw Ari Aster's Hereditary. I wish I could take that back. But Seven is definitely one of the most disturbing endings to a movie that I've ever seen. And, to this day, I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know. I mean, I think I know that it was upsetting and it was powerful, but it's like it almost was like a dirty trick, or like I had no idea something like that was coming. And I don't want to give it away because I think the movie is worth watching, but it's just an awful kind of scenario. Not even I mean, there is gore in this movie. Don't get me wrong. We see a lot of disgusting stuff, but the twist at the end is not something that we even see. It's something we hear about. It's something we find out about that has happened, and it has this effect of undercutting any sort of catharsis that we might feel from seeing justice done finally to this sick, demented killer. Um, but I won't say anything more about it than that. Hell, this is a movie from 1995. You probably already know what the twist is, but the premise of Seven refers to the seven deadly sins, and there's a murderer out there who's finding people who have a proclivity towards one of the seven deadly sins, and he's getting them to die in a way that amplifies that sin. There's an enormously obese man who he force feeds to death. That's like the first thing that we see is this big fat bloated corpse. So already you kind of know the territory you're on. But as gruesome as it is, it's also very cerebral and highfalutin and gripping. It's well told, and it keeps you riveted to the very end. And then that ending happens. All I can say, they got Kevin Spacey finally for something. I think this movie is the first time I ever saw Kevin Spacey, and he certainly makes an impression. I'll say that much. Well, this was either the first time I saw Kevin Spacey, or it was the usual Suspects, which I think also was 95. I'm not sure which was the first one, but similar performances ultimately. Seemingly mild mannered, but ultimately, incredibly evil and creepy. Maybe like the man who played these characters. I have to admit, Kevin Spacey's good. He's a good actor, regardless of what kind of person he was or perhaps still is. So yeah, 1995. My choice is 7, and that's where I'm going to end this year by year movie assessment. Thanks for watching. If you have thoughts, please leave them below.